Since YouTube isn't currently providing any revenue for these videos, Patreon is the only way I can keep this channel going. Support me there to help improve the content quality so I can bring you even more intense stories. Click the link in the description to join me on this journey and help us survive the apocalypse. Let's get straight into the story. The power went out at around 6:30 in the evening. I remember because I'd just started heating up some leftover pasta, and the microwave died mid-cycle with that little dying beep it makes. And I stood there for a second, holding a fork, thinking, huh. Just huh. Not annoyed, not worried. Just that flat, empty kind of huh you get when something small and inconvenient happens on an otherwise nothing day. I went to the window. The whole street was dark. Not just my house, the whole junction outside, the lamp posts, the little shop across the road. Everything. I could see a couple of neighbors coming out of their doors doing the same thing I was doing, looking around, checking if it was just them. It wasn't. Old Mr. Delaney from the end house was standing on his step in his cardigan, looking up at the sky like the answer was written up there somewhere. His wife came out and said something to him, and he shrugged. I went back inside. I've lived in this house for 6 years. Just me since the divorce. 2 stories, end of a terraced row, junction at the front. My mom used to call it a corner house with ideas above its station, because it's technically on the corner of 2 streets, but it's still just a regular terraced. She thought that was funny. I didn't mind. It was mine. That's all I cared about. The name's Paul. Paul Garrett. 38 years old. Used to work in logistics at a warehouse until they downsized last year. Currently doing part-time work at a small storage facility and spending the rest of my time looking at my phone too much. Not exactly a survivalist. Not exactly anything, really. That's sort of the point. So the power went out. I found the torch I keep in the kitchen drawer still worked, which surprised me because I couldn't remember the last time I changed the batteries. And I went around lighting the 3 or 4 candles I had scattered in different rooms. One in the kitchen, one on the living room mantelpiece, one upstairs in the bedroom. Sat down on the sofa, picked up my phone. 42% battery. Network signal was patchy, which sometimes happens when the power's out because the local boxes or whatever they are lose backup power eventually. But it wasn't gone completely. I got onto the news. There was something about a virus. I'd seen it earlier in the day, maybe lunchtime, a little headline scrolling past while I was eating a sandwich. Something about a new illness in the city center. Some kind of aggressive infection, cases being reported at 2 of the main hospitals. I read the headline again in the candlelight. Thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. Scrolled past. Looked at something else. That's the thing about news. You can read something genuinely terrible and your brain just files it under probably fine because terrible things are always happening somewhere and most of the time they don't reach you. They don't come to your street, to your junction, to your particular end of terrace with ideas above its station. I heated the pasta on the gas hob instead because at least the gas was still working, ate it standing at the counter. And then I went upstairs because there was nothing else to do. And it was getting dark fast. I read for a bit by candlelight, fell half asleep, woke up when the candle dripped wax onto the bedside table, blew it out. The room was completely black. I could hear the street outside, a couple of cars going past, someone's dog barking a few gardens over, a distant siren. Nothing unusual. Sirens happen. People drive too fast. I went to sleep. I woke up at 11:17. I know because I looked at my phone. The power was still out. which surprised me a bit because usually they fix it within a few hours. My battery was at 31% now because I'd clearly left something running on it while I slept. I plugged in my portable charger, the small one, almost dead itself, maybe 8 or 10% left in it, and lay there in the dark for a while listening. The street sounded different. I don't know how else to explain it. There was more noise than there should have been for that time of night. But it wasn't the kind of noise that makes immediate sense. It wasn't shouting or music or someone's alarm going off. It was more like a low, wide sound, a general wrongness in the air, like when you're somewhere unfamiliar and something is happening at a distance, but you can't tell what it is yet. I got up, pulled on the joggers I'd left on the floor, went to the bedroom window. The street below was dark because the lampposts were still dead, but there was enough ambient light from somewhere. Maybe the moon, maybe something further down the main road that still had power, to see the junction, and there were people out there. Which was strange. Not loads of them, 3 or 4, but it was nearly midnight on a weekday, and they were just standing in the road. One of them was right in the middle of the junction, just standing there, not on a phone, not talking to anyone, just standing. Their head was sort of tilted down and to the side. I watched for a minute. The person didn't move. I mean, they moved slightly, sort of a slow rotation, like they were turning in very small increments. But they weren't going anywhere. I thought drunk. I thought mental health crisis. I thought they need help, probably. I thought I should call someone. I picked up my phone and started typing 999. Then thought about the signal being patchy, put the phone down, and watched a bit longer. Then I heard a sound that I cannot accurately describe. It came from the person in the middle of the road, and it was sort of a groan. But that word isn't right, because a groan implies effort, implies lungs working to produce something. This was more like the sound had just always been there inside this person, and was now, for some reason, leaking out, low and wet and completely without meaning. And then someone else came around the corner, running, properly running, the way people run when they're terrified, arms out, one shoe missing, a woman. She came around the corner onto the junction road, and she was looking behind her, and she ran straight into the person standing in the middle of the road, collided with them hard, stumbled, caught herself, started screaming. The thing, I'm calling it the thing now because that's how my brain filed it even then, before I knew anything. The thing grabbed her arm, and it bit her. Just like that. No warning, no struggle. It just grabbed and bit. I stepped back from the window. My heel caught the corner of the bed frame, and I sat down hard on the mattress. I sat there. My brain was going through this cataloging process that I can only describe as very slow and very noisy at the same time, like all the relevant information was there, but the filing system had collapsed. The woman had been running. The thing had bitten her. She was still screaming. I could hear it through the glass. And now from somewhere down the main road, maybe 2 or 3 streets over, there was more of that sound, that low, wet groaning, multiple voices, if you could call them voices, overlapping. I stood up, went to the window again, made myself look. The woman was still there. She was trying to pull away from the thing, but it had her by the arm, and she was hitting it with her free hand, properly hitting it, the kind of hits that should have made someone let go and back up, and it wasn't letting go. Wasn't reacting to being hit at all. Just held on and kept its face down against her arm. And coming down the road, slow but steady, were 3 more of them. They walked wrong. That's the first thing I understood clearly, and I understood it instantly. They walked like something was running on the software of a body, but didn't know how the body was supposed to work properly. Heads forward, arms not quite swinging right. One of them was wearing a suit jacket, or part of one, the other sleeve gone. Another one had no shoes. They weren't looking at anything specifically. They were moving toward the sound of the screaming. I watched for maybe 30 seconds, which felt like 30 minutes. Then I went downstairs, turned the key in the front door, which was already locked, but I turned it again anyway. Then turned it again, put the chain on, went to the back door, locked that, shot the bolt at the top, came back to the living room, stood in the dark, could still hear the woman outside, but the screaming had changed into something quieter and worse. I picked up my phone. 26%. No signal at all now. I sat on the floor against the sofa. I don't know why the floor. Something about the floor felt more stable, more real. I sat there until the sounds outside changed, and then changed again, and eventually got quieter, which somehow felt worse than when they'd been louder, because the silence might have meant those things had moved on, but it might also have meant other things I didn't want to think about. At some point, I fell asleep on the floor, which tells you something about how human brains work under stress. Even then, even in the middle of that, the body just gave out and took the opportunity. I woke up when it was properly light. Gray light, early morning, maybe 6 or half past. The kind of morning that hasn't committed to anything yet. I was cold, stiff, my back hurt from the floor, and for exactly half a second before my brain came fully back online, I thought I'd dreamed it. Then I heard them outside. Not screaming anymore. That was gone. What I heard was that low, wet sound. Plural. Like a chorus that didn't know it was a chorus. Just individual sounds that happened to be in the same place at the same time. And footsteps. Slow, uneven, going up and down the pavement outside my front door. I didn't go to the front window. I was scared they'd see me, which I didn't even know yet if they'd respond to. Didn't know any of the rules yet. But instinct said stay back, and instinct is usually right about things like this. I went to the kitchen instead. The kitchen is at the back of the house and looks onto the small back garden, which then has a fence. And beyond that fence is the back entry lane. And beyond the lane is the backs of the next street's gardens. Safe-ish. Nothing moving back there that I could see. I stood at the kitchen window for a bit, and then I thought, okay, Paul, think. Phone, 21% battery, still no signal. Food, the leftover pasta was still in the pot on the hob. Half a bag of rice in the cupboard, tin of tomatoes, tin of chickpeas, tin of baked beans, some bread that was 2 days old, bit of cheese in the fridge that would go off soon without power. 6 eggs, a bag of pasta, maybe 3/4 full, some frozen stuff in the freezer that would already be starting to go soft, jar of peanut butter, some crackers, condiments that I never used, a bag of apples, most of them still good, few onions, potatoes, maybe 6 or 7, a liter and a half of juice, and water. I had maybe 4 or 5 pint glasses worth in the tap still, and I didn't know if the tap water would stay clean or if the pressure would drop eventually, so I started filling every container I could find. Pots, bowls, my one spare water bottle, the kettle. That took about 15 minutes, and by the end of it, my hands were shaking. Not badly, but consistently, like they were vibrating at a very low frequency. I ate the leftover pasta cold out of the pot. It tasted fine. I wasn't particularly hungry, but I ate it anyway because I had a feeling that was going to be an important habit to maintain. Eating when food was available and safe, not waiting until I was hungry, because hungry would come with its own problems. While I ate, I tried to work out what I actually knew. Something was wrong with some people outside. They were biting. They weren't responding normally to pain or to other people. They were moving toward sounds. The woman last night had been running away from something before she hit the one in the road, which meant this was already spread past just that one person, which meant... And this is the part where I had to force my brain to actually engage with it. This was not a small thing. This was not a one-person mental breakdown or a drug situation. This was something that had already spread enough that there were multiple affected people on my street at midnight. The news had said something about a virus. I tried the phone again. No signal. Battery at 18% now. I turned off the Wi-Fi because it was searching for something it wouldn't find, turned off all the background apps I could find, put it in low power mode, and set it face down on the kitchen counter. Then I thought about the roof. The house has a flat section at the top of the back bedroom that you can get to through the skylight. I use it occasionally in summer, have a folding chair up there, go up and read sometimes. From up there you can see a fair distance, down the back entry, along the roof line, toward the main road if you lean a bit. I went up. The skylight makes a noise when you open it. Not a big noise, but a definite clunk. I did it slowly, climbed through, crouched on the flat section of roof, stayed low. I could see the junction from up here, at an angle. I could see the main road further down. I could see 7 or 8 of them from up here without even moving position much. They were in the road mostly, a couple on the pavement. One was sitting against the post box on the corner, and at first I thought it was a person resting, and then I watched it for long enough to see it had no particular interest in sitting or resting. It just happened to have ended up there, and its body had stopped in that position. They were slow. That was immediately clear. Whatever the woman last night had been running from, these things were not fast. They walked like they were pushing through something slightly resistant, heavy and deliberate and not coordinated properly. But there were enough of them that it didn't matter how slow they were if you had to get past them. Just numbers. If 8 of them were in the road and you had to cross it, and slow or not, that was 8 chances to grab you, 8 chances to bite. I stayed up there for maybe 20 minutes. The morning was cold, the sky the kind of featureless white that northern England does a lot in autumn. No sun visible. The air that particular damp that gets into your collar and your cuffs. I watched the junction. Counted. Lost count. Some of them drifted in and out of sight, around corners, down side streets. At some point I heard something from the main road that sounded like a car engine, and I watched hard in that direction, and yes, a car came through going fast. Too fast. Took the corner badly and clipped the curb, straightened out. Accelerated away. I wanted to shout. Didn't. Watched it go until I couldn't see it anymore. Then one of the things in the road below turned its head in the direction the car had gone and started walking that way. Then another one. They were moving toward the sound. The car was already gone and they were shuffling down the road after where it had been, toward the engine noise that no longer existed. I tucked that away. Stored it. Sound. They go to sound. I got back inside, pulled the skylight shut slowly, went back downstairs. Okay. So here was my situation on what I was going to start thinking of as day 1, because it needed some kind of name. Day 1. Morning. I was in a two-story terraced house at the end of a row on a junction. I had probably 2 weeks of food if I was very careful, less if I wasn't. I had water that would run out in a couple of days if the tap stopped. I had no electricity, which meant no heating, which in October in the north of England was going to become a serious issue within a week or so. I had no way to contact anyone or know what was happening beyond what I could see from my roof. I had an unknown number of infected people. And yes, I was using that word now. Infected. Because it was more accurate than whatever polite thing I'd been trying to substitute. Shuffling around outside my front door. What I didn't have. Any kind of weapon beyond a kitchen knife and a hammer I kept in the understairs cupboard. Any kind of plan. Any kind of training for this. Any person to talk to. What I did have, a locked house, some food, a roof I could observe from, and apparently the kind of brain that goes very cold and flat when things get bad enough. I've always been like that. Panic comes later for me. In the actual moment, I get quiet and start making lists. My ex-wife used to say it was one of the things she liked about me, and also one of the things that drove her absolutely insane. Either way, right now it was useful. I made a list. Actual list, physical on a piece of paper because I didn't want to waste phone battery on notes. Things I needed to do. Things I needed to figure out. Things I needed to not do. Don't make noise. Don't open the front door. Don't go outside. Ration food starting now. Keep the water topped up while the taps still work. Keep the skylight as my observation point. Find any source of information. Figure out how long I can realistically last here. Look for opportunities. Opportunities. That was the word I used. It felt clinical enough to be usable without being paralyzing. The first few days are a specific kind of horror that I'm not sure I can explain accurately to anyone who hasn't done something similar. Not because they were the most dangerous days, they weren't, not by a long way, but because of what they were psychologically. You're in a space you know completely, your own home, your own things around you, and everything outside the walls has become completely alien. You go from making yourself a cup of tea in the morning in a normal kitchen to standing in that same kitchen in candlelight at 6 in the morning, rationing your second-to-last tea bag. And the physical space is identical. But the meaning of it has changed so completely that you feel like you're in 2 timelines at once. Day 1. I spent mostly on the upper floor, kept the downstairs curtains closed, went back to the roof 3 times. Short stays, quiet, low. The numbers of infected outside seemed to fluctuate. Some hours the junction was almost empty, just 1 or 2 of them drifting through. Other hours it filled up with 10 or 12 moving in loose clusters without any apparent coordination. They didn't seem to communicate. They didn't seem to be going anywhere specific. They just moved and stopped and moved again, pulled by sounds mostly. And when there was no sound, they sort of stalled. Late in the afternoon on day 1, I heard something from the house directly attached to mine. Number 36. Lived there by a couple, Ryan and Debbie. Ryan worked offshore. Debbie was a nurse. I heard banging. Not the infected kind, not that slow, purposeless thumping, but proper, hard, rhythmic knocking on the shared wall. I put my ear against the wall in the upstairs hallway. The knocking stopped. Then there was a voice, muffled through brick, someone saying something I couldn't quite make out. A woman, saying something. I couldn't knock back. Too much noise. I thought about it for a solid 30 seconds, and then decided against it. Whatever Debbie was saying, if it was Debbie, I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't open my front door to get to hers. I couldn't help her without helping whatever was outside find me. That was the first truly cold calculation I made in those early days, and it lodged in my chest like something hard and round that didn't belong there, and it's still there now. The knocking came again twice more that day. The second time I heard it more clearly, and I was fairly sure she was saying, "Are you there?" which is maybe the saddest collection of 3 words I've ever heard. I didn't knock back. I sat with my back against the wall, and I didn't knock back. She knocked again early on day 2, briefly, and then nothing after that. Day 2, I ate half a can of baked beans for breakfast, cold, with 2 crackers. Used the smallest amount of water I thought I could get away with for washing, which turned out to be considerably less than I'd have chosen on a normal day. My back still ached from sleeping on the floor. I'd moved to the sofa the second night, but it wasn't much better. I'd found an extra duvet in the airing cupboard and added it to the one on my bed, because the house was already getting cold without the central heating, and I knew it was going to get colder. The thing about cold I didn't anticipate, or not fully, was how much it slowed my thinking. Not dramatically, not like hypothermia or anything. Just this steady, low-level sluggishness that made decisions feel heavier and made time feel strange. By day 3, the house was genuinely cold in the morning. You can see your breath cold if you let the duvet trap any warmth at all overnight. And I started sleeping in most of my clothes. I also started doing something I'm a bit embarrassed about, which is talking to myself. Not constantly and not in a crazy way, or at least not what felt like a crazy way. Just narrating things quietly. "Okay, Paul, okay," that kind of thing. Like having a second voice in the room that was steadier than the one in my head. It helped. Day 3 was when I found out the taps were still working, still had pressure, still ran clear. And I didn't know why, but I was grateful and refilled everything I'd started to use. Also, day 3 was when I went upstairs and looked out the front bedroom window very carefully, staying well back from the glass, and got a better view of the full extent of what was on the street. There were more of them than I'd thought. Not just the ones on my junction, but the whole visible stretch of road had them scattered along it. Some were moving, some had stopped against walls or cars and just stood there. One was in the front garden, 3 houses down, just standing in someone's overgrown grass, doing nothing. One was pressed against the front window of the shop across the road, facing the glass, and it had been doing that for the 2 hours I watched in 20-minute shifts, and it never moved from that position. The one at the shop window disturbed me more than the ones that were moving. There was something about that image that felt like it was telling me something. Some kind of information that I couldn't quite extract. Like it remembered the window. Like some very old ghost of a habit had dragged it there and then stopped. I didn't let myself think about that for too long. On day 4, something happened that changed the structure of my days significantly. I found the radio. It was in the bottom of the bookcase in the living room, under some old paperbacks I'd never gotten around to reading. A small battery-powered pocket radio that I'd bought years ago for camping, and never used for camping and then forgotten about. It still had batteries in it. Miraculously, those batteries still worked. I turned it on very low, pressed close to my ear, turned the dial. Most frequencies were static, but on one frequency, I want to say it was around 91.5, something around there, I found a signal. It came and went, breaking up regularly, but it was there. A voice, a man's voice, calm and deliberate, speaking slowly and clearly in the way that emergency broadcasts always do. That overly clear diction, like they're explaining something to someone who can't hear very well. I caught fragments. Stay in your homes. Do not open your doors to anyone. The infected cannot open doors. Repeat, they cannot open locked doors. Do not go outside. Await further instruction. The situation is under assessment. Military response has been authorized. Stay in your homes. I had to play this back in my head several times because I'd caught different pieces of it at different moments as the signal came and went. But the central message was clear enough. Stay inside. The infected can't open doors. That second part that hit me in a strange way. Relief, obviously, which sounds almost funny in retrospect, but in that moment it was real and physical. This release of some tension I hadn't known was wound that tight. But also something else. Something slightly off about it. Because if they couldn't open doors, then there was no danger to me from them as long as I stayed inside and kept the doors locked. Which I was doing. Which meant I could, theoretically, survive here for as long as my supplies held out, assuming something changed outside. Assuming help came. But what if help didn't come? I turned the radio off to save the batteries and sat with that thought. Here's what I knew about my food situation on day 4. The frozen stuff was completely gone in terms of reliability. Some of it I'd eaten on days 1 and 2 while it was still cold enough. Some I'd had to throw away when it smelled wrong. The cheese was gone. The last of it eaten. The eggs I had left, 4 now, and they were still fine. The bread was finished. I had most of a bag of rice, 2/3 of a bag of pasta, the chickpeas, about half a jar of peanut butter, the crackers, though not many, the potatoes, the onions, the apples, a few other odds and ends. The juice was almost gone. I was mainly drinking tap water. Cooked on the gas hob with very low flame to conserve gas. 1 meal a day, sometimes 2 small ones. Tea once a day, 1 tea bag stretched as far as it would go. The issue that I'd been trying not to focus on directly but which kept surfacing was not the food. It was the gas. I didn't know how much was in the tank, whether it was mains or a cylinder, and I'd never had to think about it before. If it was mains and the mains failed, I had no way to cook anything. No way to boil water. The gas stove was the only heat source I had for cooking, and I didn't know how long it would last. On day 4, I also heard something from above me for the first time. Not from the street, from the ceiling. Footsteps, slow and irregular. 1 heavy step, then a pause, then another. Coming from the direction of the back bedroom directly above where I was sitting in the kitchen. I froze, didn't breathe, stared at the ceiling like I was going to see something through the plaster. There shouldn't be anyone up there. I lived alone. No one had a key. The skylight, I'd closed it, hadn't I? I'd closed it every time. I went through the last 3 roof trips in my head. Yes, closed every time, I was sure. Another step, slow, scraping slightly. I picked up the kitchen knife from the counter, stood at the bottom of the stairs, listened. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for a very long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe more, knife in hand, staring at the top of the staircase. Nothing. I went up, very slowly, 1 step at a time, letting each step settle before I put weight on the next one. Trying not to creak the boards, even though I didn't know which boards creaked because I'd never needed to worry about it before. Got to the landing. Back bedroom door was closed. I always kept it slightly open because the room had no particular purpose, used it mostly for storage and the roof access. I stood outside the closed door for about 30 seconds. Then I opened it. Empty. Storage boxes along one wall, the ironing board I never used, a chest of drawers full of old clothes. The skylight closed, the latch turned. Nothing there. I searched the room slowly. Under the bed frame, no mattress, just the frame and some boxes. In the wardrobe, which was empty. Behind the door, nothing. I went back out onto the landing, checked the bathroom, my bedroom, the other room at the front that I used as a study, shelves of books, a desk, a chair, a printer I hadn't used in 2 years. Nothing in the house. I went back downstairs. Put the knife down on the counter. My hands were shaking again, worse this time, and I realized they were shaking because of the adrenaline. And the adrenaline meant I'd been more scared than I'd felt in the moment. That's another thing about that particular kind of stress. It runs slightly ahead of your awareness of it. I decided the footsteps were the house. Old houses make noises, particularly when they're cooling down, when the central heating that normally keeps the structure at a consistent temperature stops, and the materials start contracting in the cold. It's a reasonable explanation. It's probably the right explanation. Probably. I didn't go to the back bedroom after that, unless I had to. I went up to the roof twice more that day, and I kept the skylight latch checked twice before coming down each time. Day 5 was when I found the neighbors. Not Debbie, not from number 36. The other side, number 40. An older couple, retired. I knew them by sight and by occasional over-the-fence chat in the garden. Barbara and Gerald. Gerald always had opinions about parking. Barbara grew tomatoes. Nice people, mostly. I found them because Gerald appeared in the back garden. I was at the kitchen window, mid-morning, and movement caught my eye in the garden to my right. Number 40's garden, which I could see a section of from this angle. Gerald was standing in his own garden. Alive, or no. Wait, not right. Not infected either, as far as I could tell. He was upright. He was moving with purpose. He had a coat on. I tapped the window, not hard, just twice with one knuckle. He heard it. He turned, and the relief on his face. God. The relief on his face was one of the most complicated things I'd seen in years. Because it meant he'd been alone in there, him and Barbara, presumably, since this started, and he'd been wondering if anyone else was still there. The same as I had about Debbie. The same as I had lying awake, listening to the house cool around me. We couldn't talk. Too much noise. But he pointed at his back door and held up one finger. And then pointed at my back door. And I understood and shook my head and held up one finger back and pointed up. And then at the junction at the front of my house. Meaning I couldn't risk going out, even to the back. Meaning there were things at the front that might hear a door. He nodded. He seemed to understand. He pointed toward the back fence, toward the entry lane, and made a questioning gesture with both hands. I looked past him. The entry lane was visible through the gaps in the fence boards. Nothing moving there, not right now. But I'd seen one of them back there the day before, moving along it, and I didn't know if it had gone or was just somewhere I couldn't see. I pointed at my eyes, then at the entry lane, then made a hand gesture that I hoped conveyed uncertain, not safe, don't know. He nodded again, slower. We stood there for a moment, either side of the fence, communicating through 6 feet of garden and a pane of glass. And then he pointed at his house and made a sort of all-okay gesture with his hands, flat, palms down. And I made the same gesture back. He went inside. I felt oddly better, in a way that was entirely out of proportion to what had happened. Nothing had changed. But I knew now there were 2 more people in my immediate row who were alive. That was something. That was actually quite a lot. I was wrong about one of them, but that's for later. Day 5. I also started rationing more severely. I'd been doing okay, but not strict enough. Half a portion of rice for dinner, cooked with one of the onions, and half a tin of chickpeas. The gas was still working. The water was still running, barely, just barely. A thin trickle from the tap now, rather than the full pressure I'd started with. I was collecting every drop. Every bowl, every pot, every container in the house that could hold water now held water. I even found an old clean bucket under the stairs and filled that. The phone was at 9%, and I turned it off completely to save it. Didn't know what I was saving it for exactly. Maybe nothing. But it felt important to have it as an option. Day 6. I'm going to stop and explain what day 6 was, because it was the day that changed how I thought about everything. And it started with a sound. Early morning, still dark, maybe 5 in the morning. I was on the sofa with both duvets piled over me, and I was in that not quite awake state where you're aware of existing but not quite at the surface yet. And there was a sound outside the front door. Not the shuffling and groaning that I'd gotten used to filtering as background. Something different. Something at the door itself. Scratching. Not scratching like fingernails, exactly. More like cloth, maybe. Something soft dragged along the painted wood of the door. Slow, repeated, like something was pressing against the door from the outside and moving, very slightly, against it. I lay absolutely still. Didn't breathe for a solid 5 seconds, and then breathed as shallowly as I could. The chain was on. The lock was turned. The bolt at the bottom that I'd put on when I moved in and never used before now was shot. The door was not going to open. The sound continued. It wasn't loud. It was almost the quietest sound I'd ever heard. That's what made it worse. It went on for maybe 4 minutes, maybe 5. And then it stopped. I lay there for another half hour before I moved. Then I went to the front door, very carefully, and I crouched down and I looked through the letterbox. Something on the step. Dark, hard to see. I opened the flap a tiny bit more. A hand. There was a hand on the step, fingers down, pressed against the concrete, and attached to the hand was an arm that disappeared at the letterbox frame. The thing was sitting or lying against my front door. I let the letterbox flap back as quietly as I could. Sat back on my heels on the hallway floor. I'd thought the locks were enough. I still thought they were enough. The radio had said they couldn't open doors, and I'd watched them from the roof for days, and nothing had tried my door specifically. But this one had found the door. This one was against the door. Not doing anything particularly threatening, not battering at it. Just there, pressed against it. Like it had run out of momentum and stopped. How long would it stay there? I went back to the sofa, wrapped myself in the duvets, sat upright and waited. It was still there at 7 in the morning when I looked again. Still there at 9. I heard the groaning through the door every so often, that low, formless sound, and it was horrible in a very specific way. Horrible because it was right there, inches away from me, separated by wood and a bit of metal. And the thing making it had no idea I was on the other side. Or maybe it did. Maybe it could smell me somehow, heat or breath or whatever trace I was leaving in the air inside my own house. I was getting into thinking patterns I needed to pull back from. I could feel it happening, these spirals that started with a practical observation and ended somewhere much worse if I followed them far enough. I got up and made tea, 1 tea bag, weak, no sugar because I was out of it. And I stood at the back of the kitchen away from the front, and I drank it very slowly. and I made myself think about other things. The other things I thought about were what I would need eventually if I was going to last more than another week, and how I might possibly get any of it. The shop across the road, a small newsagent type shop, the kind that sells everything in small quantities for slightly more than it's worth. Crisps, fizzy drinks, a small selection of tinned things, bread, milk, newspapers. The kind of shop that normally I barely used except for an emergency pint of milk or last-minute chocolate bar. But right now, it contained things I needed. The problem was the road, the junction, the things on the junction. And getting there during the day meant being visible, being slow, being a noise source. And getting there at night meant not being able to see properly. I wasn't going to do it yet. I wasn't desperate enough yet to outweigh the danger of it. But I was thinking about it, storing it as a possibility for when I needed it. The thing at my front door left sometime in the afternoon. I heard the groaning getting further away gradually until I couldn't hear it anymore. And when I checked through the letterbox, the step was empty. I didn't know what had pulled it away. Maybe a sound further down the road, maybe nothing I'd be able to identify. It just went. I opened the front bedroom window a crack that evening, just a fraction, enough to hear the outside world better. Sat at the side of the window, back against the wall, not visible, just listening. The street was quieter than it had been. Maybe 8 or 10 of them in visible range, but spread out, moving slowly. One had gotten into a car, somehow. The passenger door must have already been open. And it was inside the car, just sitting there, visible through the window, occasionally moving its arm against the glass. And then something happened that I wasn't prepared for at all. Headlights, coming from the direction of the main road. Slow, not fast this time. A vehicle moving carefully, lights on, which was almost shocking after days of no electricity, no light sources. The headlights tracked along the road, and the figures caught in the beam turned toward it. Those blank faces tilted toward the light. And then the vehicle, it looked like a transit van, something big and white, stopped at the junction. For about 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then a voice, amplified, coming from a speaker on the van, a woman's voice saying, "We are going to be passing through this area twice daily during daylight hours. Please display a signal from an upper window if you are sheltering and require assistance. Please remain calm. Please do not exit your property until an officer knocks at your door." And then the headlights moved again, and the van drove slowly down the road and around the corner and was gone. I stood at the window with the cold air coming through the crack, and I didn't know what to feel. I think I tried to feel relieved and couldn't quite get there, because the van had come and gone in maybe a minute. And if they were doing this twice daily, that was 2 chances per day to signal. And I'd had exactly 0 warning. And if the announcement was true, they'd already passed once today, without me knowing. I needed something to hang out of the window. Something visible enough to be a signal. I went through the house in my head. Sheets, yes. I had extra sheets, white ones, exactly what you'd use. But hanging a sheet from the front window meant opening the window fully, which meant noise, which meant the things on the street would hear it and come toward the window. And then there'd be things at my window when the van came back, which might not look like a distress signal so much as a problem. I thought about the roof instead. If I hung something from the chimney or the roof edge, it would be visible from the road without being at street level. Higher up, harder for them to reach. I didn't do it that night. It was dark, and I didn't want to risk the skylight noise in the dark when I couldn't see what was in the entry lane or on the roof level. But I planned it. Had it all worked out. I was going to do it first thing in the morning before the van made its morning pass, which I had to assume would be sometime in the first half of the day. I slept better than I had since the first night. Not well, but better. There was something about that van, that woman's calm voice from the speaker, that made the house feel slightly less completely cut off. Day 7. I got up before it was fully light, dressed in everything warm I had. Took one of the extra sheets, the flat white one, the one without any pattern, and I went upstairs. Opened the back bedroom door, which I'd been avoiding. Checked the room again, out of habit. Empty, same as always. Went to the skylight. The entry lane was dark. Not fully dark, just the gray pre-dawn that gave enough to see by. Nothing moving that I could see in the lane or on the rooftops I could see from the skylight. I went up. The morning was absolutely still. No wind, no sound from the street except for a distant, low groaning from somewhere down toward the main road, maybe 2 streets over. Nothing on the roof with me. I crouched by the back edge of the flat section, where the roof meets the chimney stack, and I wedged the sheet around the chimney as best I could, tying the corners in loose knots that would hold it without giving way immediately. It wasn't elegant. It was just a white rectangle against a gray sky, flapping slightly where the morning air caught it. I got back inside. Then I waited. The van came at around 10 in the morning. I heard the speaker first, the same recorded or live announcement about passing through twice daily, and I went to the front bedroom window and cracked it slightly. The van was moving along my road, slower this time, and there was a person leaning out of the passenger window scanning the buildings. I couldn't wave. Too much noise would attract the things on the street. But I'd thought about this. I'd taken the small torch from the kitchen. I flicked it on and off, 3 times, toward the van. 3 flashes. The person in the passenger window stopped scanning, looked at my window. I did it again. 3 more flashes. The van stopped. Not for long, maybe 15 seconds. And the person raised something that might have been binoculars or just their hand shielding their eyes. They were looking at the window, looking at the roof, at the sheet. Then they pointed at me, or at the building, just pointed. The van moved on. I didn't know what that meant. Did they see me? Did the point mean yes, we see you, we'll come back? Or were they just indicating to the driver that there was a sheet on a roof? I went downstairs and ate half a tin of chickpeas and tried not to read too much into 15 seconds. They didn't come back that day. Not in the morning and not in the evening. This was day 7. Day 8, nothing. Day 9, I heard the van in the distance, the speaker faint from the main road. But it didn't come down my street. I told myself there were a lot of streets. I told myself they were working through areas methodically. I told myself a lot of things. Day 9 was also when I heard something strange from the back garden. Not Gerald this time. Something in the entry lane. A sound that didn't belong to the infected. I knew their sounds by now. Could identify them pretty reliably. The low groan, the shuffle, the occasional soft impact when one of them walked into a fence or wall. This was different. It was a sound like something light and deliberate moving quickly. And then it stopped. Then after maybe 2 minutes, it came again, from a slightly different position. I went to the kitchen window and looked out. At first, nothing. the garden, the fence, the lane beyond it. Then movement right at the top of the fence boards, the very top edge. Something that passed quickly and dropped back down on the lane side. And then appeared again, 2 fence posts along. A cat, an orange tabby cat, moving along the top of the fence, pausing, dropping back into the lane, reappearing further along. Just a cat, doing what cats do, which is go wherever they want, regardless of the circumstances. I've watched it for a while. Something about watching the cat was unexpectedly calming. The cat was entirely unimpressed with the situation. It picked its way along the fence with complete confidence, stopped to look at something in the lane that I couldn't see, then dropped down into my garden. It sat in my garden for a few minutes, looked at the house, looked away, began washing its face with completely unearned dignity. I had a small tin of tuna in the cupboard that I'd been considering for the last few days. I opened it. Opened the back door very quietly, just a crack, just enough. Pushed the tuna through in a bowl, eased the door shut again. The cat ate all of it. Sat for another few minutes, then hopped back over the fence and was gone. I stood in the kitchen for a moment after that and felt something, some emotion that I couldn't name exactly. Not happiness, not quite. Just the weight of having done something normal, fed something, wanted something to be okay. I used my last tea bag that afternoon and decided the empty tea bags were going to be a grief I was going to process later. On day 10, something happened with Gerald. Gerald knocked on the shared fence panel in the garden, 3 slow knocks in the morning. I went out through the back door carefully, staying low, moving quietly, closed the door behind me. Cold enough that my breath was visible. I went to the fence. Gerald was on the other side. I could see through the gap at the top where my fence panel wasn't quite flush. He was holding up a piece of paper. Written on it, in thick marker, "Barbara ill, not bitten, just ill, need medicine." I looked at it for a second, took the pencil I'd brought and wrote on my own piece of paper, "What medicine?" He held up a new sheet. He'd prepared several. This one said, "Pharmacy, High Street, blood pressure plus painkiller." I wrote, "I will try to find a way." He held up the last sheet. It just said, "Thank you." I went back inside and stood in the kitchen for a long time. The pharmacy was not across the junction. It was 4 streets away, on the high street, which meant going outside, which meant the road, which meant those things. I looked at the map in my head of the area. I knew it well enough. Lived here 6 years, walked every road in a half-mile radius hundreds of times. Between here and the pharmacy, there were 3 side streets and 1 larger road crossing. The pharmacy itself was on a corner, which gave it a long frontage window on both sides. Glass frontage, which meant they'd see movement inside from outside. But also, and this was the calculation I started making, the pharmacy was only 4 streets, maybe 5 minutes walking at a normal pace. If the road was reasonably clear, if I was quiet, if I went in the right conditions, that was a survivable distance. If. I wasn't going to go that day. I was going to watch and plan and try to identify the best time window. But I was going to go. For Barbara, yes. But also, honestly, I needed to go. Not just for the pharmacy. The supply situation was getting genuinely difficult, and there was a small convenience store 3 streets south that I'd mentally identified as a possible supply source since day 3. If I was going out, I was going to do more than one thing. And there was something else too. Something underneath the practical calculation. I needed to know what was out there. I needed to see beyond my roof view. The view from the roof was useful, but it was limited. I could see the junction, bits of the surrounding streets, the general density of infected in my immediate area. But I didn't know what the broader neighborhood looked like. Whether there were other survivors. Whether whatever help the van had implied was real. I spent days 10, 11, and 12 watching and planning. 3 times a day roof, different times, noting patterns. The infected were densest on the main road, and the junction sparsest in the back entry lanes and the residential roads that dead-ended away from the main routes. They seemed to cluster where there had previously been people, shops, the main road, bus stops. They avoided nothing specifically, but they weren't drawn to places with no sound sources. The best window I found was early morning, just after dawn. 2 reasons. First, the night seemed to disperse them slightly. They moved toward sounds, and in the absence of sound at night, they drifted in random directions, and sometimes that meant the concentration near my immediate area thinned. By just after dawn, the concentration was at its lowest before whatever sounds the day brought started moving them around. Second, what little I understood about their behavior suggested they responded primarily to sound. And the early morning was the quietest part of the day. Day 12. I also checked my supplies properly, made an accurate inventory. Rice, about 3 portions left, maybe 4 if stretched. Pasta, 2 full portions. Chickpeas, empty. Baked beans, 1 tin. Peanut butter, about 1/4 of the jar. Crackers, 8 left. Onions, 2. Potatoes, 4. Apples, 2, getting soft. Nothing else of note. 2 weeks, give or take. Maybe less if I was eating enough to function, which I needed to be if I was going to go outside. On day 12, late afternoon, I heard something that I still don't fully understand. It came from upstairs. The back bedroom again. The footsteps, that same slow, irregular sound. 1 heavy step, pause, another, scraping slightly. Same as before, same as day 4. I went upstairs with a kitchen knife. Same process, slow, quiet, 1 step at a time. Stood outside the back bedroom door, opened it. The skylight was open. Not fully open, not thrown back, but unlatched and open by maybe 2 centimeters. Letting in cold air. The latch that I specifically checked every single time I came back through it was undone. I stared at that latch for a long time. There are rational explanations. The latch is old, the kind that relies on a spring mechanism, and maybe the spring was weakening and it came undone on its own. Maybe the temperature differential between inside and outside was creating enough pressure differential to push it slightly. Maybe I'd been so stressed and automatic about my checks that I'd done the motion of checking without actually checking. Maybe. I closed the latch, tested it. It held. Came down, locked the back bedroom door with the key I found in the lock on the inside. Stood on the landing for a while. The house settled around me. That sound it makes. Old houses in the cold, the contracting and creaking of the structure adjusting to the temperature. A sound that's been there all along, but that I now heard differently. I went downstairs. Night 12 into day 13, I barely slept. Day 13 was when I went outside. It was a Tuesday, I think, though the days had started to blur and I'd lost total confidence in my counting by then. Whatever the specific day, it was just after dawn. The sky, the same flat gray it had been for nearly 2 weeks. And I stood at the back door with my shoes on, my coat on, a backpack on my back, with the only bag inside it I thought would be useful. A reusable shopping bag for whatever I could carry. And I held the kitchen knife in one hand and the hammer from under the stairs in the other, and I thought, well, there it is. The back door opened quietly, I'd oiled the hinges 2 days earlier with the last of a small bottle of olive oil that had gone slightly rancid anyway, and the door swung without a sound. Cold air, immediate. The kind of cold that the house had been building to for days, but that still hit me differently coming from outside. Real outside cold, not just indoors cold. That particular sharp quality. I stood in the garden. Nothing in the garden. Nothing visible in the lane through the fence. I went to the back gate. It was a wooden gate set into the back fence, bolt on my side. I'd opened it once before to check, and it was quiet. Slid the bolt, stepped through into the entry lane. The lane was empty in both directions, as far as I could see. Narrow, probably 2 people wide. The backs of the fences on both sides, occasional wheelie bins. Concrete under my feet. I went left, which was south, which was the direction away from the main road, toward the residential streets that backed onto the lane. Moved along the wall, slow, watching. Every footstep I placed deliberately, avoiding loose gravel, stepping flat so my heel didn't clap down. Got to the end of the lane. Came out onto a side street, one of them about 50 meters away, standing in the middle of the road, facing away from me. I stopped. Watched it. It wasn't moving, just standing there, that particular stopped quality they have, like a toy run out of batteries. I went the other way. Pressed against the garden walls on the left side of the street, moved along it quickly but carefully. The street ended, crossed a slightly wider road, 2 of them here, both moving slowly in the same direction, about 100 meters up the road, neither looking my way. I crossed, got to the far pavement, kept moving. 3 streets took me about 12 minutes. I moved slower than I'd planned because every corner was a decision point, and every decision point needed 30 seconds of listening and looking before I committed. My heart was doing something I could feel in my throat. The knife felt inadequate in my hand, which was correct. It was inadequate. A kitchen knife is not a useful weapon against something that doesn't respond to pain. The hammer was better, something I'd understood academically, but that felt different now. Holding it, thinking about what using it would actually mean. Hitting something in the head, hard enough, not stopping until it stopped. I wasn't going to think about that unless I had to. The convenience store was a yellow-fronted place I'd been in dozens of times. Small, always slightly overstuffed with product. The kind of shop that has things on the floor because the shelves are full. The front door was glass closed, and I couldn't tell from outside if it was locked or just shut. 2 of them in the road outside. One near the door, one further down, both moving slowly. I watched for 90 seconds from the corner of the adjacent building. The one near the door wasn't specifically guarding it, just drifting in the general area. I waited. The one near the door drifted further away, maybe 20 meters. I moved, fast, quiet, to the shop door. Pressed my hand flat on the glass of the door first, felt the give, the hinges, pushed. It opened, not locked. Inside. Dark inside. No windows at the back, just the front glass, which let in enough gray morning light to see by. Shelves of things, mostly still on them. The place hadn't been ransacked, not completely. Some shelves were bare, the bread area totally empty, the crisp section mostly cleared. But tinned things were largely untouched. Long life milk, jars of things, water bottles, some of them, dried pasta. I went through systematically, not grabbing wildly, thinking about weight, about what would last, about what I actually needed. Tins went in first. 4 of tomatoes, 3 of lentils, 2 of mixed beans, 1 of corn, 1 of sardines. Protein, useful. Dried pasta, 2 bags. A big bag of rice that was heavy but went in. 4 bottles of water, 1 liter each, heavy but necessary. A jar of instant coffee? No, I had no kettle power, gas only, still worth it. Sugar, small bag. A jar of honey that was going to be absolutely precious. Crackers, 2 boxes. Dried apricots, a bag. A small bottle of vegetable oil. I also, because I am a functioning human being, took 2 chocolate bars from the rack by the till and ate one immediately in the shop, standing in a dark convenience store in the middle of a zombie apocalypse at 7 in the morning, eating a Twix with slightly shaky hands. The chocolate was very sweet and slightly waxy, the way Twix is, and I hadn't tasted anything sweet in nearly 2 weeks, and it was possibly the best thing I had ever eaten. I kept the other one. The backpack was full, heavy. I'd also taken, hanging from a hook near the door, a roll of duct tape and a pack of cable ties, not food, but I had ideas for both. And a pack of batteries that I didn't check the size of until later. AA, exactly what the radio took. I went back to the door, looked through the glass. The one that had been near the door was now closer, maybe 10 meters away, but facing away. The other one was further down the road. I waited. The closer one drifted. 7 meters. 5. I held completely still. It passed in front of the door without stopping, without turning, without doing anything that indicated it knew I was there. Continued shuffling past. 4 meters to the right now. 3. It moved away. I went out. The door swung shut behind me with a click that was louder than I wanted. I froze. The one to the right hadn't reacted. The one further away was facing the wrong direction. I went, back the way I'd come. Different pace now because of the weight, the pack pulling at my shoulders, the bottles banging against each other inside with a sound that I was desperately hoping was too quiet and too muffled to matter. Corner, through. Next street, keep moving. Don't look back except at corners. I got back to the entry lane in about 15 minutes. Went down the lane to my gate, in. Closed the gate. Stood in my own garden with my hand on the fence and breathed. The pharmacy was still ahead of me. I'd passed it on the way. It was 1 street before the shop, further along the high street end, and the door had been closed. I'd noted it. I'd also noted there were 4 of them on that section of street, and the pharmacy door had a push bar on it, the external bar kind, and I didn't know if it was locked or just latched. I went back inside, took everything out of the pack, organized it, found spaces for it all, sat down and ate half the tin of sardines with 2 crackers and felt, genuinely, like a person who had done something useful today. Then I went back out for the pharmacy. I know it sounds insane to go twice in the same morning. But the logic was, I was already outside, already knew the route, the morning window was still good, Barbara was ill, and getting back out would have required building all that courage again from zero, and I wasn't sure I had it. The pharmacy run was harder. 4 of them on that street, and the pharmacy had a large glass front on 2 sides, which meant they could see movement inside if they were close enough. I watched from the corner for 4 minutes. 2 of them were close to the building. 1 was in the middle of the road, 1 further along. I watched the 2 near the building. They weren't stationary. They were doing that slow drift, not really going anywhere, just existing in the space. One of them drifted toward the road, then the other, slowly, but with enough space opening up. I went for the door. Push bar. Pressed it. It gave. I was inside. Pharmacy inside. Low light, same as the shop. The dispensing counter at the back, the shelves of over-the-counter medicine in the middle section. I didn't know exactly what Barbara needed, and Gerald's note had said blood pressure and painkiller, which was frustratingly vague. I went to the blood pressure section. There were several options, all with packaging I could read in the dim light. Took 2 boxes of the most common-looking one, a name I recognized from having vaguely seen it before somewhere. Also took a box of the same brand that was a slightly different formulation, because I didn't know which one she was on. For painkillers, I took paracetamol, ibuprofen, and cocodamol. 3 different types, 2 boxes each, because again, I didn't know what she specifically needed, and having options was better than having none. I also walked the dispensing counter. The prescription medicine behind the counter was locked up, and I wasn't going to break the cabinet if I could avoid the noise of it. And the OTC shelves. And I took antiseptic cream, bandages, gauze, surgical tape, and an ear thermometer I found on a display near the front. Not for Barbara specifically. For me. For me having literally no medical supplies in the house, which was a gap I should have filled days ago. On the way out, I also grabbed a box of antihistamines. Allergies exist, always useful. 3 packets of vitamin C tablets and some electrolyte sachets I found at the end of one shelf. I didn't know exactly why the electrolytes, but I took them anyway. Water and salts. Useful if anyone gets sick, gets dehydrated. Back at the door. The 2 that had drifted toward the road were still there. 3 of them now visible from the door. The 4th somewhere behind me down the street. Can't see it. I waited. The glass of the door gave me a reasonable view. One of them was moving across the road away from me. Another was facing away. The third was facing toward the door. Not toward me specifically, toward the building, standing about 8 meters away, looking at the general direction of the pharmacy front. I waited. 2 minutes. 3. It didn't move. Didn't turn away. 5 minutes. Still there. The morning window was getting later. More sounds would start happening as the day moved on. More things moving around, sounds pulling them in different directions. I couldn't wait much longer without the window closing entirely. 4 minutes later, a sound from down the street. Something falling, a metal bin maybe, or something similar. A clatter and crash that echoed along the glass fronts of the shops. The thing facing the pharmacy turned toward the sound. Instantly. Turned and started moving toward it. I went out. Fast but controlled. No running. Running makes noise, makes breath sounds, makes your pack rattle more. Quick walk, deliberate steps, toward the corner. Got to the corner, onto the side street, into the entry lane, down the lane, gate, garden, inside. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the counter for about 5 minutes, and then I went to the back fence. Gerald was in his garden. I passed the medicine bags through a gap in the fence boards I'd widened slightly by removing one of the plastic clips, just a small gap, enough to post a carrier bag through. He took it. I saw his face when he opened it. That look you get when something you weren't sure was possible has happened anyway. He looked up, mouthed something I couldn't hear. Went inside. I went inside too. The chocolate bar I'd saved from the shop was still in my jacket pocket. I ate it in the kitchen, in the gray light, and didn't think about much. I need to tell you about day 15. Day 15 is the day the story shifts and becomes something I'm still not entirely sure what to make of. I'd been listening to the radio more regularly since I'd replaced the batteries. The signal still came and went, but I was getting enough of it to piece together a picture. The main messages had evolved. The early stay in your homes message was now mixed with something more complex. There were phrases like designated safe zones that were appearing more often. Locations being mentioned, sometimes clearly, sometimes cut up by static. The sports center on Albany Road, the secondary school on Merchants Way, the old community hall at Forster Street. These places were apparently gathering points, shelters. The Albany Road Sports Center was maybe a mile and a half from me. I knew the building, big, solid brick structure with a car park, used it a couple of times for a work event. Solid building. If they'd set up there, that was a real option. The other thing the radio was saying, less clearly, was something about how long. Some statement about the outbreak being contained, about a perimeter, about this area being a priority zone. Those words didn't always land clearly, but when I got enough of them, I could tell the tone wasn't confident. It was the tone of managed information, the tone of telling people just enough to keep them from panicking while not saying the full thing. I thought about a mile and a half, thought about how long that took me to go 4 streets. I was still sitting with it when I heard, on the evening of day 15, from the back bedroom upstairs, a sound that was not footsteps. It was a voice. Very quiet. Very brief. Could have been anything. Could have been the house. Could have been sound traveling weird through walls. Could have been my brain filling in noise where there was none because it was so desperate for a human voice that it was generating one. Any of those. But it didn't sound like any of those. It sounded like someone saying, shh. I went upstairs immediately this time. No stopping, no building myself up to it, just moved. Kitchen knife, up the stairs, landing, back bedroom door, locked, key in my pocket, unlocked it, in, the skylight, open again, the same gap, the same undone latch, the same cold air, and something on the flat section of the roof that hadn't been there before. A piece of cloth, orange, small like a scrap, maybe torn from something, sitting on the flat section, visible through the open skylight, like it had been left there. I stared at it for a long time. Then I climbed through the skylight and picked it up. It was a piece of fabric, orange cotton, like the inside of a high-visibility jacket. Torn, not cut. No writing on it, no markings. Just a scrap. I turned it over. On the back, in biro, almost illegible, 2 words. I'm here. I stood on the roof in the cold morning air, with that piece of fabric in my hand, and I looked around. The entry lane, the rooftops, the neighboring roofs, the backs of the next street's houses. Nothing visible, no one visible, no movement on any of the adjacent rooftops. But someone was there, or had been. Someone who could get onto a roof. Someone who had found their way to my roof, left this, and gone. Or wasn't visible right now, but was somewhere nearby. I'm here. I went back inside, locked the back bedroom door, sat on the landing, turned the fabric over and over in my hands. The rational list of possibilities. Another survivor on the adjacent rooftops, someone who had come across the roof from a neighboring building. The houses in this terrace were close enough that you could maybe get from one roof to another if you were careful. Someone who had spotted my sheet and was trying to contact me. Someone who needed help. Someone who had been on my roof at least twice without me knowing, and had been close enough to be on the roof and hadn't announced themselves until now. Why now? Why not earlier? Why not knock? Why not shout? There were possible reasons: noise, caution, not knowing if they could trust me. But there was also the less comfortable question. Why the roof specifically? Why not the front door, the back gate, a note through the fence like Gerald had done? I was not having a comfortable relationship with that question. Day 16. I left a note on the roof. Just a piece of paper, Same biro, under the corner of the chimney, so it wouldn't blow away. Who are you? Where are you? I'm Paul, alone. Are you okay? Day 17, the note was gone, and in its place was another scrap of orange fabric. This one said, "Can't speak, 3 houses over. Trapped, 3 houses over." That was number 44, 4 doors down the terrace from me, the other side of Gerald and Barbara. I knew almost nothing about that house. A man lived there. I'd seen him occasionally, youngish, late 20s maybe, worked unusual hours. I didn't know his name. Or he'd lived there. Something was living there now, apparently. Can't speak. That was the detail that stuck. Can't speak, not won't, can't. An injury, a condition, fear. Could be any of those. Could be something else. I wrote back, "How can I help?" Day 18, the reply, "Get me to somewhere safe. I have been here alone for 3 weeks. 3 weeks." They'd been there 3 weeks, which meant they'd been in there before I noticed anything, before the outbreak reached my street, maybe even before it reached the neighborhood. 3 weeks alone with whatever was happening outside, with no radio, presumably, no contact, no conversation. I thought about it for the rest of the day. Getting to number 44 from my house meant going outside. Out the back, through the entry lane, around to the front, too exposed. Or along the back somehow, through Gerald's garden, through the next garden, into 44. Gerald would need to know, which meant the fence communication system, which was slow and limited. Or there was the roof. If number 44 was accessible from the rooftop, if whoever was in there had been getting to my roof from the rooftops, they presumably knew the route. They knew their own roof situation. Maybe there was a route that was more viable than the street. I went up to the roof on day 18, midday, and looked carefully at the adjoining rooftops. The houses in the terrace were very close together, semi-attached with shared walls and maybe half a meter between the roof edges. Number 42 had a similar flat section at the back to mine. And beyond that, number 44. The gap between the roof lines was not large. The question was whether the roofs were structurally sound enough to walk on, and whether the gaps were crossable without making noise that would attract attention at street level. The street level, which had 4 or 5 of them visible from my position, shuffling along the front. I went back inside and wrote, "Can we come across the roofs?" Day 19, the reply was, "Yes, tomorrow morning, early. I'll come to you." Okay. Day 19 night, I barely slept. Not from fear exactly. More from a feeling of a door opening, something changing, the particular nervous energy of a situation that was about to become different. Whether the difference was good or bad, not yet determined. Day 20, just after dawn, I went up to the roof. Cold, still same flat gray sky. The entry lane empty. And on the roof of number 42, 2 roofs away, a figure. Small. That was the first thing. Smaller than I'd expected. Moving carefully, very slowly, crouched down, placing each foot deliberately. Coming toward my section of roof, navigating the gap between 42's flat section and the ridge of the next part. Stepping over it, finding footholds, steady. Got to my roof, stood up slightly, looked at me. Young woman, maybe mid-20s, maybe younger, hard to tell. Short hair, dark, cut in a way that was growing out badly. Wearing 2 coats, both of them too big, heavy boots, a backpack on her back. Her face was very tired. That specific kind of tired that isn't one night of bad sleep, but weeks of wrong. Her eyes were fine, clear, looking at me. We stood on the roof and looked at each other for a few seconds. Then she held up a small whiteboard. A kid's whiteboard. The kind you write on and wipe off with a dry cloth. On it, in marker, "Hi." I put my hand up. "Hi." She wrote, "I'm Ellie." I pointed at myself. "Paul." Mouthed the word. She nodded. We went inside through the skylight, one at a time, and stood in the back bedroom, and she looked around at the closed door, the room, the house, and I watched her shoulders drop about 2 inches as she relaxed into being inside somewhere that wasn't her own place. She sat down on the floor without asking, back against the wall, and held up the whiteboard again. "How much food do you have?" I thought about being cagey about it, in the way that isolation does to you, that hoarding instinct. Then I thought about the fact that she'd been alone for 3 weeks on the other side of 2 brick walls, and told her the truth. She wrote, "I have 4 tins and a bag of pasta and a gas bottle, about half full. A gas bottle. A portable camping gas bottle. I hadn't even thought to look for one of those. I had maybe a few days of mains gas left at my cooking rate, and then nothing." She seemed to clock something on my face. Wrote, "You can have it." I shook my head and mouthed, "We share it." Something in her face, very controlled, just a small movement around the eyes. Then she nodded. We spent that day figuring out a working system. She couldn't or wouldn't speak, and I stopped asking why. It wasn't my information to have. She'd share it if she wanted to. The whiteboard worked. Slow, but functional. I gave her the extra duvet, and she slept on the sofa while I took the bed. And for the first time in nearly 3 weeks, I went to sleep knowing there was someone else in the building. I will say this. It wasn't entirely comfortable. I didn't know her. I'd been alone long enough that having another person in the space felt strange in a way I hadn't expected. Not threatening exactly, but unfamiliar, like the house had changed shape slightly. And there were questions I had that I couldn't ask without seeming like I was suspicious of her, which I half was and half wasn't. She'd been on my roof without telling me for days. The fabric note had said 3 houses over, but she'd been accessing my roof, which implied she'd been watching me for a while before she left the first note. Why had she waited? On day 21, she answered that on the whiteboard without me asking. I'd been sitting in the kitchen eating the last of the rice, and she'd been across the table eating her own portion, and she looked up and wrote, apparently just deciding to say it. "I was watching you for a week to make sure you weren't dangerous." Fair. I wrote on a piece of paper. I was watching the street for 2 weeks to make sure those things were slow. She read it, smiled slightly. So, first smile I'd seen from another person in 3 weeks. It was a weird smile. Complicated. The kind you get when something is actually quite funny, but also kind of terrible. "Smart," she wrote. "Not really," I wrote back. "Just scared." She nodded at that. "Same," she wrote. Day 22, Gerald knocked on the fence. I went out to the back. He'd written a new note. 2 words. "Barbara, gone." I stood at the fence with the note in my hand. Gone. She'd had her medicine. I'd given him everything I could find that looked relevant, and he'd given it to her, and she'd still gone. Heart, maybe, or the illness had been more than blood pressure. Or she'd already been too far along by the time the medicine came, or the medicine was the wrong thing, or just... She'd just gone. Gerald's handwriting on the note was very careful. That same big, thick marker. The letters very precise, which I think was him holding himself together through the act of writing clearly. I wrote, "I'm so sorry." He wrote back, "Are you still okay?" I wrote, "Yes. There are 2 of us now. I found someone nearby. He wrote, "Good." He went inside. I stood in the garden for a while in the cold. I told Ellie when I went back in. She read my piece of paper about it, sat still for a moment, then wrote, "I'm sorry." Then, "How long has she been ill?" "I don't know." I wrote, "He said she wasn't bitten, just got sick." She looked at the whiteboard for a second, then held it up again. "Does he want to come here?" I hadn't thought of that. I went back out to the fence and asked. Gerald's answer came back quickly for someone who wrote with such deliberate care. "No, not yet. Maybe. Don't know." I understood that. Day 23. Ellie went back to her house via the roof to get her gas bottle and the rest of her supplies. I watched from the skylight while she crossed. She was good at it, not tentative. She'd clearly been doing it regularly. Got across, disappeared through what I assumed was her own skylight. Was back 20 minutes later with a backpack. The gas bottle clinked against something inside it when she set the pack down. Also 2 more tins, a small torch, and a book. A paperback, battered cover. The kind of thing that looks like it's been read several times. She set it on the kitchen table separately from everything else, like it was more important than the food. I looked at it. The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I looked at her. She saw my face, the sort of, "oh, come on" expression I clearly couldn't suppress. And she wrote on the whiteboard, "It's comforting." I wrote, "That book is the least comforting thing I've ever read." She wrote, "Exactly. Makes everything else seem better." Okay, fair point. Day 23 was also when the radio changed. I'd been listening at the usual times, and the same messages had been cycling, the same calm announcer tone, the same information about safe zones. But on day 23 evening, a different voice came on. Younger, not an announcer voice. Genuinely different tone, more urgent, less managed. I pressed the radio close to my ear, volume low. The voice said, "If anyone is receiving this, we are at the Albany Road facility and we are at capacity." I repeat, we are at capacity. We are no longer accepting new arrivals at Albany Road. We are attempting to maintain the current population. If you are sheltering in place, please continue to shelter in place. Do not attempt to travel to Albany Road. If you have mobility and are able to move, there is a secondary location at Holburne School, Holburne Road, approximately 4 miles north. I repeat, Holburne School. Approach from the north side. Flash your lights or wave something white. Someone will see you. We have a static signal gone. I sat with the radio pressed against my ear for 20 minutes, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. Albany Road was at capacity. That was real and specific and frightening in a different way than the general situation. It meant there was a limit to where you could go. That arriving somewhere safe wasn't a given, even if you could get there. Holburne School was 4 miles north. I didn't know it well. The town thinned out in that direction. More residential, fewer main roads, which might mean fewer infected or might mean less infrastructure either way. I relayed all of this to Ellie on paper. She read it twice and then sat still for a moment. She wrote, "How long can we last here?" I thought about it honestly. 2 weeks maybe. Less if we were fully comfortable, more if we were very strict. She wrote, "So we need to decide." Yes. She wrote, "Have you ever driven in this?" She meant in the apocalypse, in the infected streets. I hadn't. My car was in the front road. I could see it from the upstairs window. A 5-year-old gray Ford, sitting exactly where I'd parked it last time I'd driven it, which felt like a different dimension ago. No, I wrote, but we could try. She thought about something, then wrote, how many of them on your street? I went to the front window, counted. 8, 9 visible, 2 more coming around the corner from the main road. 10 to 12, I wrote. She thought about it, then wrote, a car makes a lot of noise. Yes. She wrote, they come to noise. Yes. She wrote, so the moment you start the engine. Yes. We both knew the math of it. Starting the car drew them, but if you moved fast enough, if the route was clear enough, if you could get out of the immediate area before the number clustered too badly, that was theoretically survivable. 4 miles. Maybe 10 minutes of driving on empty roads, if the roads were clear enough. If the car started, it had been sitting for 3 weeks in the cold, which I was not confident about. Ellie wrote, what about Gerald? Yes. What about Gerald? We couldn't leave him. I mean, we could, technically, that was an option. He'd said not yet when I'd asked if he wanted to come. But that was before. That was before Barbara. Before Albany Road closing. Before we were thinking about actually moving. I wrote to Gerald on day 24. Passed the note through the fence. Explained the radio message about Holburne School. Explained that Ellie and I were thinking about attempting to reach it. Asked if he wanted to come. His reply took most of the day. He must have been sitting with the question. In the late afternoon, a reply, yes, if you think it's possible. I cannot walk well, my knee. But in a car, yes. I didn't know about his knee. He'd never mentioned it. 3 of us. 1 car, 4 miles. On day 24 night, Ellie and I planned it out as thoroughly as we could using the whiteboard and pieces of paper and a very basic hand-drawn map of the route I thought would be best. North, trying to stick to residential roads, avoiding the main road as much as possible. Following the back routes I'd memorized from years of walking around the area. The first stretch was going to be the worst. Getting out of the immediate junction area. The car issue. I'd been thinking about it. The car had sat outside for 3 weeks in a cold October, and the battery might be dead, might not be. Modern cars could sometimes sit for longer than that, without losing enough charge. It probably would start. Probably. The bigger issue was the first 30 seconds after starting. That engine sound was going to carry, and it was going to carry immediately, and we would have maybe 30 to 60 seconds before significant numbers were moving toward the noise. I wrote everything down for Ellie. She read it, then added to the plan in her neat whiteboard writing. When you start car, I wave something white at the van route end of street. Maybe they come. I stared at that. The van. The twice daily van with the speaker. If it came with some kind of backup. It wasn't just a single van driving around with a woman with a speaker. There had to be something behind it. If I started the car and Ellie waved down the van if it appeared, and we had military or whatever presence to help clear the way. But we couldn't control when the van came. We hadn't seen it in days, I realized. Maybe it had stopped the route. Maybe whatever was behind it had changed, moved resources, focused elsewhere. Still, the plan had 2 versions. Version A. We go, hope the car starts, and the first stretch is survivable. Move fast, head north. Version B. If the van appears within a window, we use it. Neither version was comfortable. Night 24. Very bad sleep. I woke at 3 in the morning from a dream that I couldn't remember, and lay in the dark and thought about how strange it was that 3 weeks ago the biggest stressor in my life had been the redundancy situation and whether the new job prospect was going to come through. Such a specific kind of normal problem. So distant now, not just in time but in some other way, in kind. The things that constituted a problem before were so far from what constituted a problem now that they might as well have been from a different world. Which they were, I suppose. Day 25. We'd planned to go on day 26, to give ourselves one more day to prepare. But things changed on day 25. In the morning, from the entry lane, a sound. Plural voices, actual human voices. Not the infected groan, but real voices, and not quiet either. Someone was not following the no-noise principle at all. Someone was talking at a normal speaking volume in the entry lane, and it was clear and alarming, and I went to the kitchen window. 2 people, a man and a woman, both young, moving through the lane, not running, walking quickly. The man had a crowbar. The woman had a large duffel bag over her shoulder. Both of them looking around, checking. Ellie was at the window beside me. She grabbed my arm when she saw them. I opened the back door before I'd fully thought it through. Stuck my head out, said quietly, "Hey, you two." They spun around. The man raised the crowbar, then saw me. His face went through several things in about 2 seconds. The woman said also quietly, "Oh, thank God, are you stuck here?" "Come in," I said. "Come inside." They came in. The woman had a long graze on her forearm. Recent, not a bite. Something she'd fallen on. The man was wearing 4 layers, all of them mismatched. They were brothers and sister, Leo and Cam. No, wait, the man said his name was Leo and the woman said hers was Camden. And I stood in my kitchen with 4 adults in it and felt the cognitive adjustment of more people than I had been around in 25 days. Leo was 26. Camden was 24. They'd been sheltering in a flat 2 streets over, a first-floor flat in a converted building, no garden access, no roof, trapped in the upstairs with the front door locked. They'd run out of food 4 days ago. Leo had gone out twice to get supplies, but the local options were exhausted. They were heading for Holburne School. "Right now?" I asked. "Right now," Camden said. "We heard a broadcast this morning on someone's battery radio. Some kid left it on in the building, said the school was still accepting people, but the window was closing. Something about generators failing, needing fewer mouths to feed. Closing the window, those were the words. So, right now, 4 people in my kitchen looking at each other. And Gerald," I said. "The man next door, he needs to come too." "Leo, how's his mobility?" "Limited," I said. "His knee. But in the car." "You have a car, out front." He looked at Camden. She shrugged in a way that was either yes or this is on you. We went through the plan, the revised, compressed version of the plan that had to happen now, today, in the next 2 hours, not tomorrow, as we'd intended. The car, Gerald, the route, the noise issue. Ellie wrote quickly on the whiteboard. Adding things, Leo read it with focused eyes. Camden asked 2 practical questions about the route. We sent a note over to Gerald's fence. 20 minutes. He came out, dressed, coat on, a small bag. He moved slowly on the bad knee, using a walking stick I hadn't seen before. But he was there, and he was coming. 5 of us. I got the car key from the hook by the front door, checked out the window. 11 of them visible on the street now. A few near the car, not specifically, just in the general area. "Okay," I said. "Okay," Camden said. Distraction first. She had an idea, which she explained quickly, and which was genuinely better than anything I'd had. She'd found a tin in my kitchen and was going to go out the back gate, around the end of the terrace. There was a cut-through, a narrow alley at the far end of the row that came out on the side street. And make noise from the far end of the side street, to draw the infected away from the front of my house before I started the car. This required her to go out first. Alone. To go around the block and make noise deliberately to attract the very things we'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. She looked like she'd already decided before she'd finished explaining it, the kind of person who makes a decision, and then the explanation is just informational. Leo looked at her, and I could see them have a whole conversation in about 1.5 seconds of eye contact. She took the tin and a metal spoon from the kitchen drawer. "You've got 5 minutes," she said. Then I make noise and you go, "Don't wait. Don't slow down." She went out the back door, out through the garden, through the gate into the lane, the 4 of us in the house. Gerald sitting on the kitchen chair because his knee couldn't take standing for extended periods. Leo by the front window, watching the street. Ellie at the kitchen table with the whiteboard on her lap, not writing anything on it, just holding it. 4 minutes. Leo. Okay, they're starting to move. Further down the street, she's doing it. Faint, from maybe a street away, the sound of something being banged. Regular, deliberate. The tin and spoon. Camden making exactly the noise she'd said she would, and the infected on my street turning their heads. 1 began moving toward the sound, then 2, then 4. "Come on," Leo said. I opened the front door. Cold air. 5 of us coming out. Gerald with his stick, Leo with his crowbar, me with the car key, Ellie close behind. And I got to the car, and the key was cold in my hand, and I got in. Turned the key. Nothing. God. Nothing. A click and nothing. Dead battery. Second attempt. Click. Third attempt. I pumped the accelerator slightly, wrong thing to do with a modern engine, but old habit from older cars. Turned the key. It started. Rough and loud. Deeply unhappy after 3 weeks cold, but it started. The remaining figures on the street, 4 of them still close, turned toward the sound immediately. Started moving, slow but toward the car. "Everyone get in," I said, though I didn't need to say it. Gerald was in the back. Leo had the door for him, and then was in beside him. Ellie front passenger. I pulled the door shut. "Go," Leo said. "Where's Camden?" I said. "Where is—" 3 seconds of nothing. 4. Then movement from the side street. The cut-through. A figure running. Camden running fast. She'd heard the engine. She was coming. 30 meters, 20. The infected from the far end of the street were now moving back toward the car sound, and she was coming from between them. "In," Leo said from the back. He'd opened his door. 10 meters from the car now. 5. She grabbed the door and was in, and Leo pulled it shut. I drove. Not fast, not recklessly. I'd thought about this. Fast draws more attention. Fast at a crossing means you don't have time to check what's on the other side of the junction before you commit to it. Controlled speed. Window up, eyes on the road. The route I'd planned. North residential streets, away from the main road. First junction, empty. Second, one of them in the road. I went around it without stopping. Turned toward the sound of the car, but we were already past. 5 people, in the car. Gerald in the back with his eyes straight ahead. Leo with the crowbar across his knees. Camden with blood from a fresh cut on her palm that she must have caught on the fence on the way out. Not a bite, just a cut. She was holding it against her jacket. Ellie with the whiteboard on her lap still, holding it like the security of it. Third junction, clear. 4th. A dog came out of nowhere on the 5th Street, running hard across the road, and I had to brake and it vanished between 2 houses, and we all breathed for a second. And then we were on the broader road that ran north, more open, houses on one side and a park on the other. and I could see ahead clearly for the first time, a long, clear stretch of road, and I drove. The park had some of them in it, maybe 20, 30, scattered across the grass, moving in their particular wrong way. They tracked the car sound with their heads as we passed, but the park had fencing, and they weren't near a gate, and we were past before they reached one. 2 miles. 3. Gerald made a sound at some point, just a quiet, controlled sound. And I thought it was pain from the knee on the bumpy road, and then I realized it wasn't. He was looking out the window at the city he'd lived in for decades as we drove through it, and it was a lot to look at. Even from inside the car. The empty streets, the broken things, the things standing in gardens and roads. A bus stopped mid-route, doors open, nobody in it. Not even one of them. Just stopped. A residential street where every garden gate was open, every single one. Like they'd all been opened at once by something that went down the row. I didn't look more than I had to. Kept my eyes on the road ahead. Holburne Road. We came to it from the south end. The school was visible, a large brick building behind a metal fence. The kind of school that has a certain amount of institutional permanence to it. Solid and unimpressive, and there. Lights. Actual electric lights in the windows of the upper floors. Generator, clearly. Exactly as the radio had said. I drove north along the outside of the fence until I could see the north entrance, which the radio had said to approach from. A gate. And people at the gate, actual people, moving with purpose, in high-vis and heavy coats. And one of them had what looked like a rifle slung over their shoulder, though I couldn't be certain at that distance. I stopped the car outside the gate, turned the engine off. Silence, sudden and strange after the engine noise. One of the people at the gate was approaching, walking toward the car carefully, hand up in a hold sign. I opened the window. "How many of you?" they said. A man, 40s, not military, just a person who'd been given something to wear and a role to perform. 5, I said. He looked at the car, looked at Camden's hand. "Is anyone bitten?" "No." He looked for a moment longer. Then he turned and said something to the other person at the gate, who went back inside. The gate opened. We stayed in the car for a second. Gerald said, "Thank you for coming back for me." Which didn't have an easy answer, so I didn't give one. Then we got out of the car and went through the gate. The school was not exactly the safe zone the word implied. It was 130 people in a building designed for 500 students, with 4 generators running limited power to essential functions, with food stores that had been calculated at the time of setup and were now being recalculated daily as more people arrived, and the calculation got harder. The people running it were not military, not really, not regular forces. A mix of police, a couple of Army reservists who'd been in the area, a doctor, 2 nurses, people who'd been in logistics or had practical skills, people who just ended up here and started helping. It was not a rescue in the clean sense of the word. It was a gathering of people who were also trying to figure out how to survive. But it was other people. It was walls and light, and someone who came over when we arrived and gave us mugs of something warm, weak tea just about, made from the communal supply, and told us what the general situation was without managing the information, just telling it. Which was the most human thing anyone had done for me since the power went out. Ellie had her whiteboard. A nurse who came to check Camden's hand saw it and went away, and came back with a notepad and a good pen. Ellie held both for a moment, looking at them. Then she wrote, on the notepad this time, Thank you." Then she wrote something else underneath it, held it up for me to see. "I knew you weren't dangerous. I knew after 3 days. I just liked having the extra time." I read it. Then I laughed. It was the first proper laugh I'd had in 3 weeks, and it came out slightly wrong. Too sharp, too short. But it was real. She wrote, "Also, you were talking to yourself the whole time. I could hear you through the walls. God." She wrote, "It was actually comforting." "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, okay." I found a space against a wall in what had been the school's main hall, and I sat down. The mug of tea was still warm in my hands. Around me, people, just people, tired and real, and all varying degrees of holding themselves together. A couple of children near the far wall, which I hadn't expected. A very old woman sitting in a chair that someone had brought her, wrapped in multiple coats, apparently fine. A man who was explaining something urgently to one of the high-vis people, gesturing with both hands, not panicking but close to it. Normal, almost. A particular kind of crisis, normal. Gerald had found a chair and was sitting in it with the stillness of someone who'd been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had finally put it down. Just sitting, looking at nothing. I didn't go over. Not yet. Some spaces needed staying in for a while. I sat with my tea. I thought about the house, my house, the corner house, with ideas above its station. The sheet on the chimney that was still up there, probably, flapping in the October air. The radio on the kitchen counter, still cycling through its signal, still saying things to an empty room. The 2 duvets on the bed, and the cold settling deeper into the walls now that there was no one in there to put a gas flame on. I thought about the footsteps, the skylight, the scrap of orange fabric. I'm here. I thought about the woman at the junction on the first night, the way she'd screamed and what the screaming had turned into, the way Debbie had knocked on the shared wall and I'd sat on the other side and not knocked back. I thought about Gerald writing Barbara, gone, on a piece of paper in careful letters. I thought about Camden running through the side street with the infected moving toward the engine sound between her and the car, and the way Leo had opened his door before she was even at the fence. I thought about Ellie on the roof, orange fabric in her hand, biro pressed against the back of it. 2 words, very quiet. I'm here. The hall had a clock on the wall, battery-powered, still going. I looked at it. 10:47 in the morning, the kind of ordinary time that Tuesday mornings always are. Outside, the city was still out there. The things in it still moving. Whatever was going to happen next was still ahead of us, still unclear, still weighted with all the ways it could go. The generator was running, the lights were on. The tea was warm. I finished it, put the mug down, looked around the room. In the corner, Ellie had found a space against the wall, her backpack beside her, the whiteboard in her lap. She was writing something, slowly, looking at it. I couldn't see what. On the floor near the window, Camden had her hand wrapped now, sitting cross-legged, her head leaning slightly against Leo's shoulder. Leo was awake, looking at the ceiling, one hand on the crowbar that he still hadn't put down. Gerald in his chair, eyes closed now, breathing, 125 other people in various stages of arriving at the same particular place. The moment when the immediate emergency has passed enough to let you feel the weight of it properly. That specific quiet after the noise. The clock on the wall said 10:48. Outside, somewhere down in the city, a sound, faint, through the walls, through the distance. That particular low chorus of the wrong kind of movement. Still there, still going. But in here, just people. Just tired, Ordinary, functional people who had all, somehow, made it as far as this morning. That was enough. For right now, that was the whole thing.